What's up guys, Perry from Rockville here, and today I'm going to show you how to set up your Pre-70V.
So it comes with the preamp, which turns your 70 volt amplifier into a multi-zone setup.
And we also have some mounting hardware here so we can mount the preamp to a rack mount. So before we dive in, let me just quickly explain how 70 volt systems work. 70 volt amplifiers allow you to run a large amount of speakers at a fixed and constant wattage. So you could run 100 speakers off this preamplifier if you match the watts being drawn by the speakers to the ability of the preamp and the amplifier that's powering the preamp. We can do this by tapping the speakers so it knows how much power to draw from the preamp and the amplifier. So for example, if we pair the preamp with an amplifier that has 1000 watts, we could run over 100 speakers tapped at 10 watts. And this is a multi-zone 70 volt preamp, so that opens up the flexibility of where we can control the audio and how we want to have it set up in our space. So for example, if we were to use this 70 volt system in a house, I could have zone 1 dedicated to the living room, zone 2 dedicated to the kitchen, zone 3 in the backyard, etc. And you can run as many speakers as you want on each zone as long as it doesn't exceed the power of the amplifier that's connected to the preamp. If you want to find out more about 70 volt systems, check out our video on what is 70 volt. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in the preamp, power it on, and break down all of the controls, inputs, and outputs. So let's start with the front of the preamp on the left here. We have the mode button to switch the input source for the preamp. So if we plugged in a USB thumb drive or an SD card, it would switch to that source right away. But we can also use the mode button to switch to Bluetooth mode, FM radio mode, etc. We also got the music playback buttons like the pause and play button, the skip forward, and the previous button. We also have a menu button, which also acts as a record button for our USB or SD card. And we also have a repeat button to repeat our tracks. On the front, we have the 1/4 inch priority mic input, and we also have a second mic input on the back labeled mic 2 input. Above the first mic input, we have a chime button, which will let out a chime throughout each speaker, which comes in handy if we want to make an announcement on our microphone. Next to that, we have all of the controls for our microphone. So we have the mic 1 volume knob, the mic 2 volume knob.
Then we have the echo knob, which gives microphone 2 an echo effect.
Below that, we have the volume knobs for all of our different input sources. So first we have the line input volume knob, then we have the optical volume knob and the MP3 volume knob. Keep in mind you would also use the MP3 volume knob to control the volume of your Bluetooth device. Next we have the treble and bass knob to adjust the overall sound of our 70 volt system. We can use the treble knob to adjust all of the high-end frequencies and the bass knob to control all of the low-end frequencies. So if we felt like the system sounded a bit too harsh or on the high end, we can use the treble knob to adjust that. Or if we felt like the overall system was sounding a bit too bassy or boomy, we can use the bass knob to adjust the low end frequencies. Next, we have the master volume knob to control the overall volume of our system. And we also have a balance knob to even out the sound between the left and the right channel. So if we want to hear more from the left channel, we would turn it to the left, and if we want to hear more from the right channel, we would turn it to the right. We also have a volume meter for both the left and the right channel, so we know how loud exactly our system is. And next we have the volume controls for all of these zones. So you'll notice zones 1 through 4 are dedicated to the left channel, and zones 5 through 8 are dedicated to the right channel. Moving on to the back of the preamp, we have the output section for the left channel zones. So again, that's zones 1 through 4, and the output section for the right channel zones, which are 5 through 8. Each zone has the positive and negative terminals to connect to your 70 volt speakers. Next, we have the 70 volt outputs and inputs to connect to and from our external amplifier. So first you would want to connect from the 70 volt outputs on the back of your preamp to the inputs on the back of your amplifier. Then you would want to use the output from the external amplifier to the 70 volt left and the 70 volt right inputs on the back of the preamp. On the output terminals here, you'll also notice this symbol, which stands for the chassis ground. Now this acts as a link between the metallic parts of your preamp and the amplifier that you pair it with for a safe electrical connection. A common sign that your preamp and your amplifier aren't ground is by hearing a 60 cycle hum in your whole setup. And if you did want to ground your preamp and your amplifier, you would actually want to make this connection by using a ground wire. So you would take that ground wire and plug it into the metal chassis here on the back of the preamp and attach the other end to the body of your amplifier. To switch between stereo and mono, we have the stereo and mono button here. So when you press it in, you switch the preamp to mono mode, and when you have it pressed out, you have the preamp set to stereo mode. So in mono mode, the preamp would disregard the difference between the left and right channel so that you just have a total of 8 zones to use. And stereo mode gives you 4 stereo channels for 4 zones of left and right separation. We also have the RCA line input and the RCA line output to expand our setup even further to additional preamps or amplifiers. We also have the optical input if we wanted to set up our 70-volt system to our TV, gaming system, etc. And lastly, we have the FM antenna to strengthen the radio signal if we're using the FM radio mode. There's also a mic 1 mute knob here, which when raised up, lowers the signal of your microphone. So if we were to raise it all the way up, the microphone would be more quiet, and lowering it all the way down will have the full microphone volume. So now let's go over how to connect our Pre-70 to our amplifier here in order to get our system up and running. So the simplest way to look at it is the amplifier here is powering our whole system, while the preamp allows us to plug in our microphones, connect our music sources, control the volume for each zone, and much more. So to quickly run down our setup here, we want to go from the output of our preamp into the input of our amplifier, and then we want to run the power back from the amplifier using the outputs into the inputs of our preamp. You're also going to need a small flathead screwdriver so we can unscrew the terminals on our preamp and on our amplifier. To make the connections, you're going to need some speaker wire like this here. So I got 4 sets of speaker wire that I'm going to need to make the connections between the preamp and the amplifier. And then to unscrew the terminals, we would also recommend that you use a small flathead screwdriver. The terminals on the back of your preamp and your amplifier can also come out to make connecting your speaker wires much easier. So first things first, we're going to loosen up the left and right output terminals here on the back of my preamp. Then we're going to take our speaker wire here and link the red positive ends to the positive terminals and the black negative ends to the negative terminals. So after I've set up the speaker wire here for the left and right outputs of my preamp, I'm going to take the other end of my speaker wire and plug them into the left and right inputs on the back of the amplifier. On the back of some amplifiers, it might say channel 1 and channel 2 instead of left and right, but you can just match the left channel with channel 1 and the right channel with channel 2. Okay, so we just finished up linking from the outputs of our preamp into the inputs here on the amplifier. And now, like I mentioned before, we have to run the power back from the amplifier back to our preamp. And to do that, we'll start by loosening up the output terminals here on the back of our amplifier. After that, you're gonna take some speaker wire and plug one end into the output terminals of the amp. Now that I have the speaker wire set up to the output of my amplifier, I'm gonna take the other ends and plug them into the positive and negative terminals for the left 70-volt input and the right 70-volt input. So after you have everything all set up, like your preamp to your amplifier, you got some speakers connected to the preamp and you're ready to go, here's a general rule of thumb. When powering on your system, we recommend powering on your amplifier first, then you can go ahead and power on your preamp. And we do it in this order just to avoid any popping sounds when powering up your whole system. That's all there is to it. So now from here, we can set up our speakers to our preamp and whatever music sources we want to connect, like our MP3 players, Bluetooth devices, the optical or line inputs, whatever we want to use, we connect to the preamp. So when setting up our speakers, we have 8 different zones to choose from, and remember that they're divvied up between the left channel and the right channel, with zones 1 through 4 going out to the left channel and zones 5 through 8 going out to the right channel. You also want to remember the wattage capabilities of the amplifier that you have set up with your preamp. For example, the amplifier we're using today has 1000 watts, so we don't want to exceed 1000 watts with our speakers. But we still have plenty of options when setting up our speakers, as long as we don't exceed that 1000 watts. The amount of speakers you can have set up really depends on the tap options you have on your speakers. So for example, for this CC80T speaker here, we can tap anywhere from 2.5 watts to 20 watts. So if I wanted to set up 200 of these speakers, I would want to tap each of them at 5 watts. Then I can divvy them up between all of the different zones we have available on our preamp and parallel wire them to connect them to the preamp. Just to give you the general idea for my setup today, I'm just gonna connect this one speaker I have here to zone 1 on the preamp. So I'm gonna do that by loosening up the terminals here for zone 1. I'm then gonna connect the red positive end to the positive terminal of zone 1 and the black negative end to the negative terminal of zone 1. Then I can take the other ends and plug them into the positive and negative terminals here on my speaker. And if you wanted to set up even more speakers, you're just gonna parallel wire from the first speaker to the second speaker by taking another set of speaker wire. Connect that second set to the positive and negative terminals from your first speaker, then plug the other ends into the positive and negative terminals of the next speaker, and then you're just gonna repeat that process all the way down the chain. If you need help parallel wiring your 70-volt speakers, we actually have a video on that you can check out. So after you've connected all of the speakers that you wanted to have in your setup, all you're gonna wanna do next is tap each speaker to the desired wattage amount. Again, let's keep with the idea that we're setting up 200 of these speakers off of our preamp. So in this case, I'm gonna want to tap my speaker to 5 watts. And keep in mind, you're just gonna follow these same exact steps if you wanted to set up your speakers to different zones like zones 2, 3, 4, etc. And the benefit of using more than one zone on your preamp is the independent volume control. So for example, if I was using this setup in my house, I can have zone 1 dedicated to my kitchen, zone 2 dedicated to my living room, zone 3 dedicated to my backyard, etc. And have each room playing the music, movie, or whatever I have connected to my preamp at different volumes. So one of the cool features of the Pre-70V are the 2 microphone inputs that we have on the front and the back of the preamp, so we can set up a paging microphone like this one here. To do that, you're just gonna need your microphone and a 1/4-inch cable. Plug one end into the 1/4-inch output on the back of your microphone. Then plug the other end into one of the 1/4-inch mic inputs. For today, we're gonna use the priority mic 1 input. Next, we'll wanna raise the mic 1 level knob here on our preamp. To make sure we're hearing everything coming out of the preamp, we'll raise the master volume knob. And if we have our speakers set up to specific zones, we'll want to raise the volume on each zone that we're using. On some microphones like this one here, there's an independent mic volume knob, and you'll want to make sure to raise that as well. So whenever we're ready to use our microphone, we can press mic on. And now if I talk into the microphone, check 1, 2, you should be able to hear my voice coming out of the speaker. Another cool feature is the mic 1 mute knob here on the back of the preamp to lower the signal of our microphone or to mute it in general. And remember, there's also the mic 2 input on the back of the preamp. If you wanted to set up another microphone, you're just gonna follow the same exact steps, except you'll wanna plug into mic input 2 and then raise the volume for mic 2 on the front of the preamp. And remember, we also have the echo knob that works with mic 2 only to give mic 2 an echo effect. Another thing I wanted to show you guys is how you can mount the Pre-70V into a rack unit. The first thing we'll want to do for this setup is attach the included rack ears here and the handles for the rack ears. That way we have an easier time mounting the unit into our rack. So we'll start with one rack ear at a time. If we look at the side here, you'll see these 3 smaller holes here. And if you look on each side of the preamp, you'll see these matching holes. You're also going to want to take the screws that came included to attach the rack ears to the preamp, and you're going to want to look for these screws with the round heads on them. So you're going to line up the holes on your rack ears to the holes here on the side of your preamp. Line up these screws through these holes and use a screwdriver to secure the ears onto the preamp. And now after you have the ears attached, you can attach the handles by using the flathead screws here. First, you'll take the handle and line up the holes here on the ends of the handles to the top and bottom holes here on the rack ears. Line up the flathead screws to these holes and use a screwdriver to secure them onto the rack ears. You can also attach the handles on the ears first and then mount the ears to the preamp using the same steps that I mentioned before. So after we've done that with the first rack ear and the first handle, we're going to repeat this process to attach our second ear and handle to the other side of the preamp. So now that we've got the rack ears attached to the preamp, let's go ahead and fit it onto our rack. So here I have the rack unit that I'll be setting the preamp up to today, and as you can see, I already mounted the amplifier that goes with my preamp for a nice organized setup. So what we're going to do is place the preamp right under the amplifier, and we've left just enough space to do so. Speaking of spacing, it's important to note that the preamp requires a 2U spacing in any rack unit, but you'll notice that the screw holes here on the rack ears are positioned differently. So while it does require the 2U spacing, the alignment is more of a 1U spacing. So just keep that in mind when mounting it into your rack. So to count the appropriate spacing within your rack, you just want to take a look at the holes here along each side. And to count 1U, you actually want to count 3 of them together. So every 3 rows would count as 1U. So again, because the preamp takes up a 2U spacing, we're going to count down here, 1, 2, 3. That would be 1U right there. And then to count 2U, you actually want to leave just 1 space in between and then count another 3 after that. And there you have the 2U spacing. So we can use the handles here on the front of our rack ears to guide the preamp into the spacing in our rack. And once it's placed securely inside of the rack, we're going to want to make sure to use M6 screws and M6 nuts to secure the preamp into the rack. And just like that, we have our preamp all set up to our rack unit here, and we still have access to the back to connect it to our amplifier for power, to set up our 70-volt speakers, music sources, etc. So now that we know everything there is to know on how to set up the Pre-70V, let's head to another set right now to hear the preamp in action. Alright guys, so here we are with our setup. In this room we set up 2 different zones. So we got zone 1 up here and zone 2 over there. So now let's show off the bells and whistles of the preamp. So we got the chime button right here to get everyone's attention before an announcement. And you hear it throughout each zone, which is really nice. We've got 2 of our microphones set up. So we've got the paging mic right here. Check 1, 2. You hear my voice through each zone, which is really cool. And we also got a second microphone set up here. Check 1, 2. Hello, hello. And then we got the echo knob for mic 2. So we turn that up. Check 1, 2. Gives our second mic some extra flair. Hello. All right, there's a ghost in the zone. And of course, there's plenty of ways we can play music through the system, with one of the ways being Bluetooth. And all you have to do to set that up is go to your smartphone or tablet, go into the Bluetooth settings and search for the device that reads Pre-70V, click on it to pair. And when you hear that sound, you'll know your device is connected. So I'll play some music for you guys, and to show off the multi-zone setup, I'll start with zone 1, then I'll lower it and play it through zone 2, and then I'll play it through both zones at the same time. So here we go. All right, sounds great. So this is zone 1 right here. I'm gonna lower it now and bring in zone 2. All right, here it comes with zone 2. Nice. Very great for that head as well. Now let's bring them both in together. Nice. So cool. So hopefully this showed you guys how easy it is to set up your Pre-70V. But of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to our customer support team through phone or email. As always, I'm Perry from Rockville, and we'll see you guys next time.